with them, and So this guy, he really don't like white people. Now the guy's name is Micah, and Micah is 25, and he's an Army veteran living in Dallas. And Micah, he's an interesting guy. In fact, he's very sensitive about police being unnecessarily violent with his fellow black citizens. And one day in 2016, he hears the news about this guy, Alton Sterling. And Alton Sterling is a black man who was unalived outside a convenience store by white police officers because they allegedly thought he was reaching for a gun. And so Micah hears about this and he is super pissed. I mean, a lot of people are. And he feels like this shooting was unjust. Oh, but it gets worse for him because the next day he hears more terrible news about this guy, Philando. And Philando, he was out driving with his girlfriend and his daughter one day, and then the police pull him over, and the same thing. They unalive him because they allegedly thought he was reaching for a gun. And so Micah hears this news, and he has had it with this nonsense. How can this keep happening? How can police just keep killing black citizens and then walking away like nothing happened? And this is when he just snaps, and he decides to get revenge for both Alton Sterling and Philando. And he's going to do that by murdering as many white police officers as he can. And so he gets to work on this plan. He looks for a place where he can pull this off, somewhere with lots of police officers running around. Then he realizes there's going to be a local protest in Dallas about those recent shootings, and police will definitely be there to control the crowd. And so Micah grabs his assault rifle and a pistol and a bulletproof vest, and he heads over to the protest. And then he gets there, and he parks close to it, and he steps out, and he straps on his vest, and a protester passing by notices him, and he thinks he's a cop. And he's like, "Good day, officer." And Micah's all pissed off. He's like, "I ain't no fucking cop. Somebody's gonna die tonight." And I guess the protester's like, "What the fuck?" And so Micah, he sees a group of police officers, and he walks up, and he casually starts talking to them. And I guess he's like, "Hey guys, how are you doing today?" We actually don't know what he specifically said to them. But suddenly, Micah brings out his rifle, and he starts shooting at them. And the officers are like, "Oh shit!" And they return fire immediately, and Micah runs for cover. And people hear the gunfire, and they start panicking and running for their lives. And Micah, he tries to force his way into a nearby college by shooting at the glass doors. But a couple of officers are already inside, and they see him, and they start shooting at him. But Micah, he's determined to get inside that building. And so he turns around and he spots an officer in his path and he shoots him. Then he finds another entrance to the building and he shoots through the glass and he forces his way in. And here he is if you want to see him. It's a shot of him on security camera. Now, while all of this is going on, police, they're looking for him and bullets are flying everywhere. And at one point, one of those bullets hit him. So now he's wounded. But he keeps moving. And so he runs up the stairs and he makes his way into the college's library. And there he finds a big window overlooking the street where a bunch of officers have gathered, and it's an elevated position and the perfect angle. And so from that window, he starts shooting down at the officers on the street. And blam, one of them gets hit. And blam, another one gets hit. And he shoots 5 cops total, and 2 civilians also get wounded. And around this time, Micah notices that the police are already in the building and they're looking for him. And so he runs out of the library and he heads into an office that holds the school's computer servers. And so he gets into the server room and he finds cover and he keeps firing at the police. And the police, they can't just rush at him because, they might get hit. And so now we're in a standoff. And Micah, he's not coming out. And police, they're not about to rush in there. I mean, he's got an automatic weapon, and he's already shown that he's not afraid to use it. Like, he's already shot a bunch of them. And so they call in negotiators. And so now these negotiators are all trying to talk to him. But Micah, he's already not a fan of police officers. But he's especially not a fan of white police officers. And so he's definitely not going to listen to these negotiators. So they send in a negotiator who's black. Now, this new negotiator, he starts talking to him, and he's trying to be nice, and he, introduces himself, and they actually got some body cam footage of all this.
Why? You say you're gonna die here anyway, so what does it matter, bro? Okay, I won't call you, bro. I apologize. You said we're killing your black brothers, right? You know I'm black? All I'm asking is that we resolve this situation, man. I want to hear your story.
Now, Micah, he doesn't believe that this negotiator's really black because he can't see him. And he tells him to prove that he's black by turning his weapon on the other officers and shooting them. Now, obviously a negotiator, he's not going to do that. He's not going to shoot his coworkers. But he asks Micah, why are you really doing this? And Micah says, African liberation. And the negotiator's like, Micah, if you put your weapon down, maybe we can get you a news channel to tell your story. Because he's thinking maybe Micah just wants to get his message out there. But Micah, he's still not cooperating. He's like, nah. And he says that men like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X have been talking for decades, and the time for talking is over, and it's now time for revolution. And as the conversation continues, he doesn't seem like he's going to give up. And it's still too dangerous for police to rush in, but he does start getting honest with them, and he tells them that he's really upset over the killings of Alton Sterling and Philando and how all of that was handled, and that he's doing all this as a way to get revenge on the police, particularly the white ones. Now at this point, he tells them that he wants everyone, including himself, to transition from this life to the next. So basically he's saying he wants everyone in this situation to die, including himself. And so the back and forth conversation drags on for 4 hours, and police still can't talk him into coming out. And during this time, he says all kinds of crazy stuff. Of course, he says he doesn't really like white people, especially ones who are police officers, and that he wants to murder as many as he can. Then he rants on about a bunch of conspiracy theories, and the negotiator, he tries to talk him down and talk him into surrendering peacefully. But Micah, he doesn't want to hear any of that. He makes it very clear that he is not gonna back down. And he's like taunting the officers, telling them to come down the hall, come at him. And this is where police really begin to weigh their options. If they rush in, he'll definitely shoot them and they could lose a few more officers. If they use tear gas, Micah might come out and shoot them and they could also lose a few more officers. And so it just doesn't seem like they're going to be able to negotiate their way out of this. I mean, they've already exchanged 200 rounds with this guy. I mean, he killed 5 officers, wounded 9 other officers, and wounded 2 unarmed citizens. And so they decide there's only one thing left to do. They gotta take him out with a bomb robot, which is one of those little robots. You've probably seen them in movies. They kind of look like this. Now, normally these little robots, they're used to defuse bombs. But police are thinking in this case, they're going to stick a bomb on one of them and have it drive into the room that Micah's hiding in and just blow him up. Now, they've never done anything like this before. In fact, no police force in the country has ever done anything like this before. But they're going to try. And so police, they load explosives onto the robot and they drive it with the remote control over to where Micah is. And before Micah can react, kaboom! The bomb explodes and it unalives him.
Yeah. Me.
You aren't ready for this one. This might be the weirdest story I've ever covered. And it all starts with this guy, Neil. And Neil is 43 when the story starts, living in England, and Neil is a vascular surgeon. But Neil is also a really weird guy. I mean, he's very into amputation, but not just because of his own job. He has always wanted to amputate his own body parts because allegedly he secretly finds the idea of amputation hot? Yeah, this is very bizarre. Anyway, one day in 2019, Neil comes up with a plan to have his lower legs amputated, and along with that, scam the insurance company out of a bunch of money. And so Neil gets to work on this plan. First, he either has some sort of insurance policy or he gets one in the private sector. Either way, he makes sure he's insured. Then he gets a bunch of dry ice, and he soaks his lower legs in it, like just the part below his knees, so that part of his legs freezes. And he has to soak them for like hours, and the dry ice hurts. Like, this is not a fun time that he has to do this, but it works. He successfully does a lot of damage to his legs. Then, I assume he calls an ambulance for himself and is like, "My legs are messed up, come get me!" And so, I guess an ambulance rushes him to the hospital, and when the doctors ask what happened, he comes up with this whole story about how he was on a camping trip with his family and he hurt his leg, and then when he got home, he developed sepsis or something. And the doctors examine his legs and they're like, "Yep, you got a sepsis infection." And they conclude that there's nothing they can do for him and that they have to remove his legs. And I guess secretly, Neil is like, sweet, because, this is all part of his plan, because I guess he thinks amputation is super hot, like it gets him going. And of course the doctors, they don't know this, they think he has sepsis. And so Neil, he goes into surgery, and the surgeons remove his legs right below the knee. 7 weeks later, after recovering in the hospital, they send him home. So he goes home and he starts, of all things, a YouTube channel, and there he starts vlogging a little about his amputation journey.
So I'm now a bilateral below knee amputee.
And so now he doesn't have legs, and I assume he's happy because he low-key thinks amputation is hot. And he's getting all sorts of sympathy from the people around him because his accident was so tragic and unexpected. Meanwhile, he goes and he quietly cashes in his insurance claim, and he's awarded more than £466,000, or around 630,000 US dollars. And from there, Neil has to recover for a few months, and he gets prosthetic legs, and he learns to start walking on those, and he vlogs the process a little bit. And about 6 months later, he goes back to work at the hospital as a vascular surgeon. Here's a picture of him. You can see he's got the prosthetic legs on. Now, throughout his recovery, he's been getting all sorts of media attention. And this dude, he's playing it up.
Probably been the toughest year of my life, that goes without saying. It's been a very strange year.
Even the BBC does a little special segment on him, and they interview him. And he's like telling the media and people how, this has changed his outlook on life now. And, he had taken things for granted like walking the dog or playing football with his kid, but he'll never be able to do that again. Bitch, it's your fault. Anyway, in 2020, he ends up winning some kind of award for bravery in his fight to return back to a normal life, I guess. Meanwhile, he's also working on the side as a lecturer at a local university. And in 2021, he applies for the European Space Agency's Parastronaut Feasibility Project, where they're seeing if people with a physical disability could go into space. And so he applies for a spot, and his story is so inspiring that he ends up on the shortlist for the program. Like, the way he is getting away with all this is insane. Now, remember how I said you aren't ready for this one? Well, here's where it all gets really weird. At some point, Neil connects with this guy, who we'll just call Creepy. Here's a real-life picture of Creepy if you want to see it. Now, Creepy, he runs a website, and I just recently learned that this is a real thing. It's some kind of website where people will pay him to amputate their body parts, with consent, but it's like a sexual thing for them. So Creepy will then film these amputations, and he will put those videos on his website, and people can then purchase them and watch the videos. or he will perform the whole procedure for people to watch on live stream. I guess there's a whole subsection of people out there who are not only into that, who are willing to pay money for it. Now, at some point, Neil stumbles upon Creepy's website, and he's like, oh snap, this site is fine, because, amputations are his thing. And so he signs up for it, and, he loves it. Like, he has found his people. Now, coincidentally, one of the services Creepy advertises is having limbs frozen off. I guess he does that for his clients, like if you want your limbs frozen off, he's the guy you go to. So at some point, Neil visits the site so much that he gets in touch with Creepy, because, they share a mutual interest. And they become friendly, and they start chatting and messaging back and forth. And in their conversations, Neil opens up to him like, guess what I did? And he starts telling him about how he concocted this whole scheme to freeze off his own legs and how he tricked everyone. And he basically confesses his crime to him. And of course, Creepy's like, jolly good show or whatever. But it doesn't matter that he confessed, because Creepy, he's never gonna leak that information to the police or to the public. Until 2020. One of Creepy's clients comes to Creepy one day, and he has like a bunch of gruesome back alley operations and amputations done to him. Things I won't go into too much detail about on this app, but just so you know, he basically had him cut his junk off. Yeah, I know. But afterwards, this junkless guy, he starts claiming that it wasn't consensual, that the whole time Creepy had been manipulating him into participating in these back alley amputations. So he goes to the police, and he gives them all kinds of details and information on Creepy and the weird operation he's running. And it turns out that what Creepy's doing is illegal. And so the guy gives police images and videos and screenshots and messages and all kinds of evidence. And so police, they start investigating Creepy, and they track him down, and bam, Creepy is arrested. Here's his mugshot. Now, in the course of their investigation, police shut his website down, and they start going through all the information they find in order to identify other victims or perpetrators, and that is when they run across Neil's messages. And so they start looking into him. And they find out that he had bought 3 of Creepy's weird amputation videos from the website, showing some pretty gruesome stuff, and that they had exchanged about 1,500 messages about his own amputations, which, in the end, ends up being evidence against him. So, in 2023, bam, Neil gets arrested. Here's his mugshot. And eventually, he pleads guilty, and he gets sentenced to 32 months in prison. While Creepy also pleads guilty, and he's sentenced to a minimum of 22 years in prison. Oh, and there's one more thing that makes all this even that much more awful. Neil was a surgeon, so he had a bunch of former patients who are now seeking legal advice because they're thinking that maybe Neil had recommended that they get something amputated when they didn't really need it, just because he finds the whole procedure hot. Get the fuck out of here. Oh my, imagine that. Imagine if that had happened to you. And a huge shout out to Leonardo.ai for sponsoring this video. If you want to make really cool art for your videos or just for your life, like this or like this, then sign up for Leonardo.ai. So this guy is about to meet a dog in the desert, and this dog is going to change his life. Now the guy, his name is Dion, he's a marathon runner, he lives in Scotland, but one day Dion decides he's going to compete in the Gobi March, which is a 155-mile ultra marathon going through the Gobi Desert in Asia. So he travels to China to run this marathon, and then bam, the race starts, and Dion and the other runners, they set off through the first part of it. And that night, the runners, they're all resting, and they're sitting around a campfire, probably talking about how hard the day was. And that's when Dion, he sees this little stray dog running around the camp. And this dog, she's approaching all the runners, and she's trying to get them to give her a bite of their food. Which is tough, because the runners have to carry all their own food with them for the week. So they have very limited supply of it. So Dion, he sees this dog, and he's like, hell no, dog, go on, get! Then the next day, Dion and the other runners, they make their way to the starting line. And then he looks down, and there's that dumb little dog again, chewing at his shoes. And he's like, damn it, dog, go on, get! And then the race starts, and the dog is like chewing at his feet for a whole quarter mile, and Dion's like getting annoyed, like, go on, get! And lucky for him, the dog finally disappears. And Dion is kind of relieved, because it's hard enough running through a desert without a stray animal trying to trip you up. But then, 8 hours later, after running through a thick forest area, Dion looks down, and there's that stupid little dog again, running alongside him. And he's like, I said go on! Yep! But the dog continues to follow him, running alongside him when he crosses the finish line to end the second day. And spectators and the people around all watching, they're all looking at this and they're cheering them both on. Yay, little dog! So then later, Dion gets some food from his supplies, and that freaking little dog is still following him around. And at this point, he realizes this little dog probably hasn't eaten all day. And I guess he feels bad, because he gives the dog like half the meat he's eating. And the dog loves it. Nom 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 nom. And you know, from this point on, he's fucked. Because like once you feed a stray dog, it is not going to leave. So that night, the little dog curls up next to him and falls asleep. And so Dion decides, okay, fine, she's not going to get, so I'll just name her. And he names her Gobi, after the desert they're running through. Then the next morning, sure enough, Gobi is there with him at the starting line, and she continues running right alongside him. Later that day, Dion is still running, and he comes up to a place where he has to cross a really wide river. So he wades into it, and he's walking through it, and he crosses like the worst part of it. But then he hears Gobi back behind him, like whining and crying. And he looks back, and he sees her, and she's still way back there. She's not jumping in this river. And Dion keeps moving forward, but Gobi just keeps whining and crying out. And so Dion, he decides to do something he's never done before. He turns around and he goes back. He wades through the river and he grabs Gobi and he carries her the rest of the way over. And later, Dion is on to the 4th and 5th stages of this race. Now with these two parts of the race, the heat can easily get up to 110 degrees Fahrenheit, or whatever the Celsius. And Dion's worried that little Gobi will follow him into that heat. So he gives her to the race organizers and he asks them to hang on to her and transport her to the last stage of this race. And then, on the final day of that ultra marathon, Dion, he's about to finish this race. So he's running and he rounds the corner and he heads toward the finish line, and Gobi, she sees him and she runs over to be with him, and they finish the race together. And it's pretty cool because Dion actually gets second place. And in total, he and Gobi ran 78 miles together. And their story is all heartwarming, and the news picks it up and they write about it a bit. So Gobi and Dion end up having like fans now. And so Dion decides like, all right, fine, I guess I'll keep this stupid dog. But getting Gobi out of China and back to Scotland isn't going to be easy, because you can't just transport an animal from one country to another. There's like paperwork and fees and regulations. So Dion, he has to fly back to Scotland to start the paperwork to get Gobi out of China. Meanwhile, he leaves the dog in the care of one of the race organizers, and she's going to look after him and everything's going to be fine. Until one day, Gobi gets out and she runs away. And poor Dion, he hears about this and he is devastated. And no one can find Gobi. And 10 days go by and there's still no sign of the dog. So Dion, he decides to take action. He posts all about it on social media. He contacts a dog charity in China and they start printing missing flyers and posting them all over town. Dion even offers a reward of £1,000, or about $1,300 US, to anyone anyone who can give them information on where Gobi might be. But still, they get no leads. So then the fans of Gobi and Dion, and apparently there are hundreds of them, they start to look around town for Gobi. And Dion, he flies back to China to join them in the search. And so he gets there and he scours the city. And he and the fans, they put up over 30,000 flyers. And a week goes by, but still, there's no sign of his little friend. And Dion, he starts to get really worried. Because, like, what if Gobi were stolen? What if Gobi was taken and is now somehow part of the dog meat trade? Which apparently is a real thing in China. So Dion is super worried. But then he gets a text, and he checks his phone, and it's from some anonymous person, and it's saying, "Hey, we think we found your dog." And Dion, he's a little suspicious, but this is the biggest lead they've got so far. So he drives across the city, and he goes to this, like, small apartment, and there he meets this family, and this family's like, we think this dog might be the one you're looking for. And sure enough, when that dog sees Dion, she goes apeshit. Because it's Gobi. And Gobi is just all over him. And finally, after all that, they are reunited. And eventually, Dion is able to bring her back to Scotland to live with him, and here they are in real life. The good ending.